Okay, and we are live. Welcome to Coffee with Mercury and Ryan today. How you doing, man?
All right, how you doing?
Good. Let's make sure everything's checked out here. I'm gonna pull up the chat on my tablet, and we will dive into a hangout session for a couple hours. So, you have anything in mind that you want to talk about today, Merc?
No, not at all. And I'm not very awake. I got up just in time to be here for this. Yeah, sort of a blank slate at the moment. I don't have anything particular on my mind at all.
Sweet. So we've got Nolan here. Welcome, Nolan. We've got Grizz here. Hey, brother. I'm so glad you guys are both here. And Grizz says, I'm here now. Entertain me. So, what do you mean the banner changed, Grizz? What is that supposed to mean? The banner changed. So we're just going to wait for some people to get here. I don't have anything particular in mind to talk about either. Oh, it'll probably help if I turn the gain up. Try speaking again. How's the audio, everyone?
Yeah, am I coming through okay?
I think so. You're coming through fine to me. Uh, and Grizz says I'm backwards today. I don't even know what that. The image that was on the screen before you went live changed right before you went live. Oh, I see. I gotcha. Okay, as long as it's not going to interfere with the actual stream, we're good. Anyways, so here I am. Here's Mercury Black. It's our first live stream together for a while, except for we did do that one with Grizz the other week, so I guess that counts. But we haven't really done podcasting over the last couple months.
Yeah. Until we have some stuff to respond to, do you want to fill people in on your morning routine and how that's been going since you've changed the Coffee with Ryan schedule?
Yeah, my morning routine's going great, and Mercury's been helping me stay accountable by checking in with me, and I've been checking in with him. Essentially, I have to do 2 hours of reading every morning, including exercise for an hour or so. Sometimes it's 30 minutes of exercise, sometimes it's an hour and a half. It averages out around an hour. So the system that I have going is an hour of reading right when I wake up, then an hour or so of exercise, then another hour of reading to keep my brain fresh. So that's going really well. I've done it for about a week straight with that particular routine, and I just find that I have to do that 2 hours of reading to keep up with my academic pursuits, and it's just essential because I have to keep up with the classwork, and then I also have to pursue personal interests for dissertation topics and things like that, things that I might be writing about for my PhD. So yeah, it's just something I can't put off. I have to do it, and Mercury's been very helpful. So yeah, I feel great doing it. Some days I had a migraine last week, and it's been hovering for about a week or so, and that has been difficult because for those of you who have had migraines, you know how much of a pain in the ass they are. So that's just been hovering. So I had a really bad one, put me out for a day, and then it's just been like hanging over my head. And today's the first day that I felt good in about a week, so that's good news. And yeah, morning routine's fantastic. All said and done, it usually takes me about 4 hours because I also have to meditate and do my other practices and stuff like that. So that's what's going on. What's up, Longstone? Longstone's here.
And so, to everyone watching, how's everyone else doing today?
Yeah, how's everybody doing? You know, I feel like the opposite of entertaining right now. I kind of feel quiet.
Yeah, me too.
It'll all flow out.
Now that you've taken more
No,
time away from.
Grizz says if it's a pain in your ass, it's not a migraine. Those are headaches. No, dude, it's a migraine. I can't move for it's like someone's hammering a nail in my head. Like it's not just a pain in the ass. It's like I can't see. My vision goes blurry and I lose. It's definitely a migraine. I lose it, and it runs through my family. My mom gets some, and Colton, my brother, gets some. I know what you mean though, because maybe I didn't describe how painful it is. But when I get a migraine, I can't do anything but sleep for about 4 to 6 hours, and then if I'm lucky, my vision will, come back, and I'll be able to open my eyes and you know, lay in bed for the rest of the day. So if I get a migraine, game over for the day. Um,
I think he's responding to the fact that the ass is the wrong end. That's not where the pain is.
oh, so
Ass head.
so he's being funny. I just wanted to make sure you all knew. It's not a fucking headache. I will not stand for migraines being called headaches.
Yeah, I've never had migraines, but from what I've seen of other people who do, yeah, it's an entirely different class of monster.
Yeah, that's why I was so tenacious in my response to good old Griswold Grimm there. What's up, Daniel? Daniel's here. Gloff is here. Howdy, Gloff. Good to see ya. Daniel says that we both sing a relaxing song. Wow. Do you feel like singing?
Not without
No.
music. No.
Oh my god. Now that I have OBS banging on all cylinders, we can watch videos together and respond to shit. Should we pull up a video clip? What do y'all think? Jordan Peterson. We could watch anything. We could watch Jonathan Haidt. We could watch what else? The Weinstein brothers. We could watch Robert Sapolsky. Any suggestions for clips today? Because we're not feeling overly talkative for some reason. Maybe that'll generate something.
I have something to say about the singing, though. As much as I didn't respond that I wanted to sing, singing I find is very therapeutic. Like when you're on your own, not singing in front of people, I'm talking, but like during depression and stuff, sad music can help. And I notice often people will just listen to music, maybe because for so many people, you're somewhere you'll be overheard. But I find singing along to music very therapeutic, whether it's like depressed, sometimes singing along to a sad song, or anger. You're dealing with a lot of anger and you're trying to find a safe way to vent it. You don't want to be punching holes in the walls and shit. Put on some loud fucking Motorhead or something like that and scream along.
Imagine prisoners.
Oh, fuck. I know one clip I would want to respond to if we could show it, but I don't know if we could show it.
What do you mean, if we could show it?
Because it's a clip from Comedy Central. Like, I know all the IDWs don't give a shit about being clipped. I don't know if Comedy Central does.
Hold on a second. I'm trying to pull up a. I'm trying to see if I can make this shit work. There we go. So we've got a clip. What's the clip that you want?
Fuck yeah, I'm just trying to look to see.
Sorry, everyone. We're gonna find this clip here that Mercury wants to watch.
Yeah.
I want to update this thumbnail. It's not captivating enough. Sorry, everyone. We're all over the place right now. We need more visual to pull people in. We need like I was gonna say something stupid.
Yeah, go ahead. Say something stupid.
No, I'm not gonna do it. Discernment, my friends. All right.
Okay. So, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah.
Okay.
Clip they put up a couple days ago about it's Jeffrey Epstein's death sparks multiple conspiracy theories.
Okay.
It's not even details about Epstein, but jump to 2 minutes in and play about just 20 seconds from it, and you'll see why I wanted to respond to it.
What's the actual title of the clip?
The actual title is Jeffrey Epstein's death sparks multiple conspiracy theories. / The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. And just started at about 2 minutes.
Well, I'm not seeing that title.
Really?
Yeah.
I just checked to make sure that was it. That's odd. I have it playing on my screen.
Let me try it again.
Unless it's one of those things of, because we're in a different country, we see different things.
I have no idea.
Because with some of those bigger channels, I find sometimes I go to watch one and it says video not available in your country.
Yeah, I'm not sure, man. I see what I see is Jeffrey Epstein's death in America's prison problem.
With Trevor Noah?
Yeah, but it's totally different title than what you said.
Oh, okay. So the point was, he's talking about it, and then he says that Epstein's been known to associate with such people as Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and then he says, and even famous scientists, and the photograph they fucking show is him sitting beside Steve Pinker.
Are you sure it's not Colbert on the Late Show?
Colbert might have shown the same photo, but no, I was talking about one with Trevor Noah.
Oh, okay. All right, well, let's let that go for now. But what were you saying about it?
So he's like describing like people he's been known to associate with, and he says Bill Clinton, and a picture of Bill Clinton pops up. He says Donald Trump, a picture of him pops up, and then he says and other and famous people within the scientific circles. And the picture that comes up is Jeffrey Epstein sitting right beside Steven Pinker, with Steven Pinker with a big fucking smile on his face. And for a moment, it was late at night, I was watching it, and for a moment, I was like, for fuck's sakes, if the IDW is fucking corrupt, that is it. I'm like, if Steven Pinker was associated with this, I'm not listening to any more of his shit. And so I actually went and looked, like, for years now, I don't look into conspiracy theories, but I went to look that up because I was like, what the fuck is with this picture of Steven Pinker? And I looked it up. There was a response from Pinker saying recently he started being associated with Epstein in some press, and that he barely like that. Yes, they have circles that overlap. He's been at events with him, but he didn't know anything about it. He made it clear he didn't like the guy on a personal level. And then he went on to quote from his book where he described rape as one of the worst crimes we can do. But I still found that upsetting because with something as serious as Epstein, first of all, anyone involved we should know. And I'm not even about punishing people, but like that kind of shit's got to stop. But on the other side of it, don't make political points because somebody has one fucking photo with the guy. That's too serious to be throwing around. And yeah, you shouldn't be linking people to that activity in any way if they have nothing to do with it. But from what I looked into, it seemed like Pinker's response was believable to me. And so I'm not completely disheartened.
What the fuck? I'm just kidding.
But I do feel like what the fuck, because he said some people have been matching him up with that, just like the kind of people who've been trying to take him down.
Media is just a shit show. Everything's a... What can you even trust anyway? I mean, there's going to be all sorts of information out there, and you have to be a goddamn research expert to figure out what news articles are viable and what is bullshit, and people putting up these ideas about conspiracies. You're not guilty by association. So that's first and foremost just ridiculous that association would prove you to be guilty. But furthermore, we can't trust anything the media is putting out there on a large scale basis, I don't think. Sad as it sounds.
And it sucks when with shit like that, people are still trying to use it to their own advantage. Like trying to push a political agenda on any sort of tragedy or trying to get ahead, cheap shots with people and that shit to me is just bullshit. It takes the seriousness of the crime away. And I'm surprised how much like joking there is about Epstein's death.
Well,
like, that's really not funny. Like, if it is some sort of conspiracy, that's fucked up because we're talking like this is, I thought the one basic thing that we could agree on is that shit is horrible. And on the other hand, if it really is some sort of weird fucking coincidence.
Well, what I want to know, because on Twitter, Eric Weinstein keeps raving on about it as a conspiracy, but I've only read his tweets, which are short and they're kind of cryptic. Do you know what he's alluding to? Like, what would the conspiracy be? I haven't looked into it.
Yeah, I haven't looked into it deeply either, but I caught a bit about it on Tim Pool and a bit on, I watched some of the late night shows a bit, so I've heard a bit of it from that, but it's like the world's getting fucking weirder. It's just exactly out of a bad movie.
Okay, I've got some comments here. Welcome, Vecure. Longstone says it's good to see you too. By the way, Longstone says Pinker isn't really associated with the IDW. He gets flack as a systems apologist. By the way, I just watched the video that one of our Discord members shared on Peugeot's criticism of Pinker, of his Enlightenment Now book, and it was a good video.
Yeah, I watched that too.
Yeah, so maybe that's something we could get into during this. We could even watch some of Peugeot's clip. But then Longstone also says Epstein. Is it Epstein or Epstein?
I don't know for sure.
Epstein worked for a couple the guy Epstein worked for dumped massive coin into Ivy League schools, and Gloff says the conspiracy is the media telling us Epstein killed himself, which makes zero sense. And then Longstone says Kakistocracy runs on blackmail. I don't know what Kakistocracy is. Do you?
No, I don't know that word. Although saying it runs on blackmail, I don't know, perhaps it's sort of on the line of the kind of conspiracy saying that to get into certain circles, they encourage, seduce you into committing crimes that they have the proof of so that they know you're controllable. before you're allowed into a certain circle. Although my main point for bringing it up wasn't even to jump into the conspiracy, but I did want to get it out there because I could imagine myself in a different mood, not looking any further into that and just feeling differently about Steven Pinker from that point forward. So my point was like the main point to bring it up was I did look into it a little and his response sounds reasonable to me. And it sounds like any association between Steven Pinker and all these fucking sex crimes is just bullshit. That he was at certain events because that guy tried to walk in the intellectual circles, but that Pinkerton didn't know him well and didn't even like the guy.
Did you say?
But yeah, the idea is that apparently this guy's been running, and yeah, I don't know too many details at all, but I've heard reference to he has some island called fucking Pedophile Island, and that he bought and or possibly kidnapped underage girls for weird fucking orgies and shit for rich and famous and royalty and shit, and that he's been doing it for years, running a fucking some sort of weird sex cult, but like not.
Well, I've known about demonic, satanic sex cults. Well, hearsay and conspiracies for a long time. Yeah, that stuff exists. That's for damn sure. That stuff definitely exists. People don't want to talk about it, but it's out there. It's fucking out there, and it's out there. I think. And I don't want to get too far down this fucking bullshit because it has nothing to do with how we can sort ourselves out. It's a goddamn distraction.
And the main point is Steven Pinker should not be associated with it, from what I can tell. So that photo being put around is bullshit.
Fuck that. No, but that dude, there's some stuff going on in the world that make you fucking puke and just ugh. But I digress. I mean, that's out of our control, is it not? All we could do is live the best lives we can. What's the point in talking about it unless we're going to have some sort of power to change it, right? I mean, that's my philosophy. What else can we do?
Yeah.
And, I guess you could spread awareness, but then it gets into the whole realm of focusing too much on conspiracy and not enough on what you can actually do in your life.
But I think like when Peterson says, one thing you could do is aim at being the strongest person at your dad's funeral. Another thing you could aim to do is, even though it's unlikely and most of us are never going to encounter it, be the kind of person who can't be seduced and corrupted by those kinds of circles.
Right, like the strengthening of the individual.
Yeah, absolutely. Stronger individuals won't get corrupted by that shit. And yeah, it's out of our hands. Like, it's too far away from us to do anything. But you never know what lives anyone else out there is listening to. And when it comes to that kind of shit, rape, the satanic cults, and child abuse, if that is anywhere in your life, I thought, that was the one thing, at least, that we had all agreed on. Was that was bullshit in our society. But again, I think the only reason that's going on and the only reason the cover-up can go on is because so many people are not well integrated and so many people are far too easily corrupted.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I still think the sword.
Well, this goes into the idea of shadow integration too, is to be willing to look into the face of horrible evil and to stomach it in such a way that you both are detested by it but also understand it in yourself and understand it in the world, and you're not naive about it. You've seen it. You're not hiding from the fact that these things exist. You're able to face it, and by the same token, there's some sort of antidote in that process in which you can resist the naivete by which you would be overcome by it if you hadn't had faced it in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or it brings to mind for me, fuck, what was the name of that movie? A movie came out a few years ago. Did you ever see it where it starts with someone gets a phone call and they're told to kill a fly? And they kill the fly, and the phone calls from like an anonymous voice. And then the person says something like, hey, we've put $100 into your account. And they're like, okay, what is this? And then the person on the phone explains that they're now invited to a game that they can do each next step. And they said, like, so that $100 is yours. You want to try for 1,000? Like, then when the person says, okay, what do I have to do? They say, eat the dead fly. And fuck, what is, have you seen that movie?
No.
Fuck, I cannot remember the name of it. But I remember the first time I saw it years ago. Right at that, oh, and the thing is, from there forward, you can win up to like $1 million or something. But it's you have to get all the way to the end of the contest to win.
Mm-hmm.
The next 1,000 you get stays in your account if you make it all the way through. When the person like eats the fly for the $1,000, I can remember thinking like, nope, I would say no to that right away. Like it's different if you keep that 1,000 for eating the fly, but I could see instantly from the beginning of the movie where it was going. And the idea is what's interesting in that movie is it shows the way Peterson says evil corrupts you one step at a time. Because the thing is, you kill the fly, which you wanted to do anyway, you get $100. Then you push yourself just a little to do something you normally wouldn't do for the money. You eat a dead fly. And of course, the next thing is worse. And the next thing is worse until by the end of the movie, the person's doing things they never would have done before because you're already in. And you're being pushed one step at a time.
Yep, yeah, the hearts of men are corrupted in subtle, cunning ways. Actually reminds me of the Silmarillion, which I'm reading right now because I'm doing a Jungian analysis on Melkor, who is the primary evil character in this universe. And this is Tolkien's. The Silmarillion is essentially Tolkien's the backbone of the lore of Middle Earth and other lands within the entire universe that precedes Lord of the Rings. But anyways, essentially, the Melkor is basically Satan, is what I'm coming to think, at least as I'm reading it. And he is, right off the bat, taking the beauty of the creator's gifts that have been given onto him as one of the primary gods of creation, along with the other. They're called the Valar, and he twists the music that they all have this beautiful ability to sing, but he twists the song, and then he's ridiculed by the creator, and then he feels shame, and that shame turns into resentment. And anyways, eventually he, in his bitterness and anger and resentment, he creates this whole following of evil creatures and beings and corrupts Middle Earth through violence and cunning and all these things. But it's fascinating because essentially you can see how he uses half-truths and lies and different methods of deception to turn the hearts and the minds of otherwise suitable beings under the realm of the creator, right? And so he subtly corrupts all these beings. And it's so interesting too to point out the primary things that drive his evil, and one of them is shame, and then anger and bitterness in reaction to that shame. So I thought that was fascinating, how shame was almost the inception of the evil, but even before the shame was the tendency to subvert the creator's will and take it onto himself to create music that was kind of awful and terrible and went against the flow of existence. So there, even before the shame, was the tendency to go against, like Satan, to go against the will of the creator and create his own likeness in things. To like, and just let me think through this for a second, because it's important for my research project. Almost, you know how Peterson talks about the satanic archetype in part is the fallacy of falling in love with your own intellect.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that you're going on here how shame is what led him to turn against the creator, because that's the opposite polarity of the Luciferian story, though, that for Lucifer it was pride. So I'm interested in hearing more about this.
Well, I think at first it was arrogance to think that he could bend the universe to his own will, right? So that's kind of falls in line with pride. But then when he was ridiculed and was like slapped around, like, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't do that." Then it was shame, and in response to the shame, then there was anger and resentment and bitterness, and that drove him further. That drove a wedge further between him and the creator, and that's when he started really taking an evil turn.
And so it sounds to me like to put that idea together with the Luciferian story, because with Lucifer, it wasn't that he thought he was the best and got shamed.
Right.
It was he was seen as the most beautiful
Yeah.
of all people. So his was reinforced. But so it sounds like, again, talking about the danger of either end of polarity. So the polarity of pride and shame, that either extreme on its own can lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that's a primary lesson, I think, about shame is the tendency for shame to drive us deeper into our own hatred or our own bitterness. I think that that's a fundamental piece there, that shame in some sense gives us a reason to turn down a dark path, because shame is defacement. It's just a total debasement of your self. There's no redeeming power in the shame. So the shame in of itself lends an excuse or a good reason to do wrong, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I also think there's like two different ways down that wrong path. I think it can happen just from difficulty. And well, difficulty can also refine you and push you in a good direction with the right choice. But I think some people can naturally fall onto a dark path, like the way there's plenty of school shooters and stuff that they were not actively corrupted by any force. It's not like they got in with some satanic cult or some group that actively tried to corrupt them. It's their existence was too painful. They were never given any meaning to understand it. And you can just shame, guilt, and allowing the darker parts of you to protect the sensitive parts can result in a person going down the wrong path.
Yes, that's right.
There's also the active corruption that some people, and to me, the worst form of sort of following in that archetype of Lucifer isn't even going and being a lone individual like the serial killer or the school shooter. It's when you actively try to corrupt others. So it's when you form some fucking hate group, or it's when there are people out there, like there are satanic cults that actively corrupt people. And there's some truth to these conspiracies where people go out of their way to corrupt somebody with a skill so they can control them. But then there's also the people that are just corrupting others so that they feel better about themselves. And that can happen in the smallest scale, like just somebody in a work environment that doesn't feel good about themselves. So they turn people against each other. You know, they start encouraging you to pick. Or you see it in the schoolyard where one child can be encouraged to pick on somebody else. And here, you'll have our acceptance if you help us pick on this person. And
that's the subtle corruption that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I get to a few comments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So let's see here. I just want to read these before we respond to them because there's some really good stuff in here. Longstone says, resentment rather than the shame being the corrupting force. Griswold says, Might be most vulnerable to be. It might be most vulnerable to be shamed about what you're proud of. Nolan says, it's pride followed by shame. Shame. It's like the fall in Genesis, to eat the fruit and then to recognize your nakedness. Yeah. Yes, that's kind of what I was getting at. That's a very good point. Longstone says, pride is transforming the shame to resentment instead of taking accountability. I like that. Actually, that's really interesting. Daniel says, "I'll watch later." Okay, Daniel, have a great day. Yeah. So this idea of Melkor, who becomes Morgoth in this story, in this genesis of this universe, they are all given the Valar are all given the ability to create this beautiful music that's in harmony with the creator's music, who's named Iluvatar, and it's this beautiful picture of how things are created. And so I could just, in the story, just picture Melkor start to taint the music with his own will, with his own self-identity, with his own selfish desire, not in harmony with the Tao, with all things, but in almost in an obsessive, self-interested way, which corrupts the music. And I could see almost the naivete or the ignorance in that act in of itself, that it was just, imagine yourself as Melkor having just been created, and then all of a sudden feeling this innate temptation to twist the threads of the universe, and you start doing that and you don't realize you're just doing it, you're just following that temptation. Then the ridicule comes, and your response, just like a little kid who gets told, hey, don't stick your head in the toilet, buddy. You can see it in that little kid's face by their creator's criticism, their parents, their creator, that they're flushed. They freeze almost for a second. And sometimes that can create a sense of bitterness or anger. And what's also interesting about the whole thing is that Iluvatar created Melkor as one of the highest beings of power. And one of Melkor's first impulses was to turn against the threads that were being created in harmony. So does that not fall back on Iluvatar? And then you start getting into philosophy, right? Or, and Jung talks about the left and the right hand of God, where the left hand of God is evil and the right hand of God is good. But then in the New Testament, it got separated into there's God and then there's Satan. So it got fractured. Instead of all things are God, there's the terrible hand of God and there's the benevolent hand of God, or the just hand of God. It got fractured into there's God and then there's Satan, or there's Christ and then there's Satan, but they're not all God anymore. So it became more of a fractured philosophy according to Jung's reading of it. So anyways, I'm saying all this, I'm trying to gather my thoughts, because essentially what I want to do with this research is I want to, essentially at first I wanted to take a parallel to the hostile brotherhood, Cain and Abel, Thor and Loki, Satan and Christ. And okay, so I thought Melkor was a good representative of one side of that coin, and then there's other characters in the Silmarillion, such as Manwë, who's essentially the spokesperson of the creator, or the closest in kinship to Iluvatar. And if you're a big Silmarillion nut, and I'm getting all this wrong, forgive me. I'm not as well versed as some. But anyways, at first that's what I was interested in, the hostile brotherhood, the Christ figure, and the fall of the Cain figure, or the Satan figure. But now I'm getting more interested in just the fall. So now the research might just become about understanding the fall. And that's, in of itself, I could write a good 15 pages of academic research on Melkor and the fall, potentially. And I could look at Cain and Abel, and I could look at Satan, and I could look at all these different figures. Loki is
Although
more of a trickster type, but
yeah, if you're going to focus specifically on the fall, the brother to Lucifer would perhaps be Michael rather than Jesus.
say that again.
Because if you're going to look at just the fall, the brother to Lucifer that you might be comparing might be Saint Michael as opposed to Jesus. Because in the mythology, like in the Christian mythology, like Christ didn't exist yet when the fall occurred. The fall, the brothers would be Saint Michael and Lucifer,
Right.
where Michael stayed on the side of God. And so just that might be the brother comparison at the point of the fall. Although, and I want to jump in more on everything you were just saying, like getting more in depth here about good and evil and Cain and Abel and all this. But really quickly, I want to say one thing that's just practical to internet culture. Look at what shame can do to somebody. Like what the power of shame is a force in the universe to create evil. And consider that before you get your recreational joy out of shaming people on the internet. Whether it's an individual that you want to shame for some excuse or for not having the right ideas for things, or even, perhaps shame can be useful for directing people's behavior. It's also fucking dangerous. And we should be really careful about piling on and shaming people excessively for their mistakes or their inadequacies.
Absolutely. And we should also understand the evolutionary philosophy and purpose of shame, which is to keep groups functioning. So, like, for example, in the Apache, the Lenape Apache, the Lipan Apache, they would shun members of the tribe to teach them potentially for days, to teach them a valuable lesson. And that would instill shame, but the shame would be used as a teaching tool so that you would be less likely to do that sort of thing again. So it's not like shame is this purposeless human emotion. It has a biological purpose in that it makes you feel a sense of remorse and embarrassment, and if it works properly, then you'll think, okay, so when I do this, this is the consequence, and I don't get along as well with the tribe. So if I work on this particular thing, then I'll fit in, and that'll be better for group survival. That's kind of the evolutionary logic. However, just like any instinct, it can run itself riot. It can become excessive. Instincts are always becoming excessive with human beings, right? Like our instincts have a tendency to overutilize their own purposes. And then that's when it becomes, I guess you could call pathological or unbalanced or destabilized. So pathological shame, I would argue, is different from evolutionary shame in that it's not serving a good purpose anymore. It's just beating you over the head for no reason or for an excessive reason. So I think that's another discrepancy worth teasing out.
Well, it's just like cutting your fucking chest open. Yes, somebody could crack your rib cage, pull it apart, and be extending your life if it's a surgery. On the other hand, most of the time, breaking somebody's chest open is not good for them. We should realize the power of shame and use it very responsibly. Because I think it could be easy for someone to take what you just said, which is all true, but use it to justify shaming people in all kinds of ways. It's a much more powerful tool than we treat it like often.
Yeah, and I'm not even necessarily in favor of it. I'm just, because it's controversial whether or not shame is even something you should use. Whether you're parenting or I don't know. I'm not a parent. I don't know to what end is shame useful and where does it run past its own usefulness. However, is it necessary, fundamentally speaking? If you think, going back to that tribe I was talking about, we're looking at a real problem here. Let's one example that Tom Brown Jr. uses, who teaches about this tribe often, is there would be the town criers, essentially. They would come around, they would walk around the village, and they would say, when was the last coyote yelp? Or where did the last bird chirp? Or, where was the last squirrel? And if they didn't get the answer right, then they would be shunned, because you not knowing where things are and what is happening around the village keenly, if you're not keenly aware of your senses, that's a risk to the entire tribe, right? Because you could get ambushed, anything could go wrong at any given moment. So that was a tool to keep everyone on edge, because God forbid you miss that sound, and that ends up being a raiding tribe, right? And so it makes sense, and it's a powerful lesson. And that's the other thing, is it's using fear as a teaching method rather than passion or love or interest, right? So there's things that we pursue in learning because we're loving it, because we're interested in it, and there's things that we pursue in learning because we're afraid. And that's why Peterson, I think wisely, uses both in the future authoring program. He uses, what is the hell, right? What are you afraid of that you could become, that you're moving away from? And what are you inspired about that you could become, that you're moving towards? So that way you're at least afraid enough that you're moving away from something and it's keeping you on edge, like the town crier, or you're excited enough that you're moving towards something at the same time. So perhaps both are equally important, but the question I bear in mind is, to what extent would shame be useful, and then where do you draw the line? And that's kind of the big question. As a parent, as a peer, as a leader of a group, things like that.
Also, though, it really, whoever's dispensing the shame is also making the value judgments. So, for instance, we can come up with good examples, but then it can be used in a racist society. You'd be shamed for being kind to somebody outside your race. So even when used as a tool for shaping behavior that functions properly, it can be used to the wrong end.
Absolutely.
And we should be really careful about, projecting our values onto other people in weaponized form, using shame and whatnot. And it's interesting to think about the difference between shame and guilt, and how differently the person will react, whether or not what they're being shamed for lines up with their guilt. So, for instance, if I'm being shamed for something that my own conscience, my inner voice also tells me is wrong, I'm going to react completely differently to I'm being shamed of something that my inner voice, in fact, says is right. Like, for instance, somebody tried to shame me for treating everyone of every race equally. I'm going to respond differently to that shame than I would respond to for shame if somebody caught me lying about something, or, do like belittling somebody, and where it wasn't actually friendly joking, took me and said, you know what, that was bullying. You were enjoying making that person feel bad. I'll respond completely differently to that when my own guilt lines up with the shame or not.
Yeah. Well, that's the redemptive hero story, right? The hero is essentially someone who can go counterculture for the sake of a better good. Christ obviously is the pinnacle, and Peterson maps the meaning really well. He's the pinnacle of the hero's myth, of the person who goes counterculture in order to redeem the culture, but at first has to basically say, that doesn't fit with my internal compass. Your definitions don't fit with the society's definition, don't fit with my internal compass. So I'm gonna voluntarily suffer through that, knowing that I disagree and knowing that I'll be ridiculed and shamed, right? But I'm doing it willingly because I'm guided. Nietzsche's idea of the Ubermensch, the Overman, is similar in some ways, in essence, because you're rising above the whims and the expectations of a society to contact what's the most true for you. So you're willing to acknowledge that you might get backlash or you might not be approved of or accepted in certain regards, but that's okay because the ultimate sacrifice you're making is for something representing truth or higher good or being the best you can be, which to Nietzsche was the pinnacle of existence. It was almost like to him, like culture was an influence of lesser minds to Nietzsche, you know? Like it was like those who are influenced by culture weren't strong enough in character. We're going all over the map here, by the way. We're wandering far and wide.
Yeah, and there's lots of good stuff to go back to. Or do you want to check the messages?
Sure. And at this point, I think we're just discussing wherever it takes us. It's not like, it started about the research question, but we don't have to stick with that because I think we've already wandered off of that, which is fine.
No, but I would also be happy to jump back to center, back to the research question, see where we wander, and then jump back.
Sure. Romeo Duke says, sticks head in the toilet. Nolan says, you should consider reading Paradise Lost, Ryan. I read it recently, and the internal dialogue of Satan is quite interesting and might give you some insight. That's awesome. Thanks, Nolan. Longstone says, 2 paths out of shame, redemption or resentment. Shame, yes, that's very succinct and beautifully put, Longstone. You're a good philosopher, Longstone. It's always great to have you around. Shame is the emotional response to sin and missing the mark coming to, quote unquote, missing the mark coming to light. Fantastic. Grizz says,
isn't that guilt? Because you can be shamed for something that isn't missing the mark. Shame is when you're worried about what other people think about it. And to me, guilt is when you're worried about what your higher self, your conscience, and God think.
Here's what I would say to that, Merc. Shame is being bad. Guilt is doing bad. So shame would be I as a soul am fundamentally off the mark. So it's a question more of the depths of who you are. Guilt is more I did this wrong. It's more action to me. I'm not saying this is objective or universal, but it's more action oriented or it's more within a specific context of acting in the world, whereas shame is more vertical. It has this way of cutting through your identity. It's not relative to what you did, but it's more about who you are. So shame is more of a question of your essence. Am I essentially bad? Or am I essentially wrong?
But we can be shamed for things that involve no guilt whatsoever. Being ugly, having zits.
Yes, exactly, because they're questioning the fundamental nature of your being. To me, shame is about your being. The essence of, are you okay as a being? Is it okay that you exist? Where guilt is about specific actions. That's just how I conceptualize it. I don't know if that's something that would be accepted on a universal scale, but that's how I think about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I've always thought of it more as shame is involving what other people think and guilt is involving what you know to be right and wrong.
Yeah, I don't think of it that way.
I can imagine being ashamed of plenty of things that you wouldn't feel guilty about, and vice versa. Because you could be in a peer group where you will in fact be rewarded for criminal activity. So there would be no shame involved in admitting you killed somebody. In fact, if you killed the right person, everyone's going to fucking treat you like a king. Yet you could have guilt about it. No shame, because it's fine to tell all your peers.
But that's how it's being interpersonally experience. So that's social shame versus personal shame, where it's like I might not be shamed for an action. It doesn't mean I don't feel a sense of shame for myself about who I am as a person in that particular circumstance. Because to me, I might be able to do something without being shamed by somebody else, but that doesn't mean it won't bring up shame for me about the nature of my own character. That's just my, I mean, the whole guilt versus shame discussion it seems so obvious, and I think it is obvious in some ways, but there's some nuances in there that aren't necessarily teased out when we talk about it. We don't really dive into the trenches, which I think it's good that we're doing now, because then we find things like we're operating on somewhat different definitions, which means that we're not necessarily having the same conversation, which is important to figure out. And
I think that happens all the time, whether we discover it or not. We often don't question the meaning of each word we're saying enough that all the time we're talking to people and everyone's using words slightly different.
Yeah, well, that's the truth. Everyone's living in their own world to some extent, you know. Let me finish these comments. That and Benjels just said it, and this is what I was just saying too, Benjels. I've heard that guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong. So that's basically how I conceptualize it. Mercury's definition's a bit differently. Then we have Tyler's here. Says all hail Jesus. Thanks, Captain Obvious. I don't know what was the Captain Obvious comment, but I'll be Captain Obvious if that suits your needs. Grizz says it's safe to say that you're enjoying shaming. There's a problem. Yeah, that's a safe statement. Longstone says heterodoxy, homodoxy, orthodoxy. Danny Rumiko says, "Hey, Dan, how you doing? Really enjoying this, guys. Fantastic. So glad to hear it. Homodoxy is groupthink," Longstone says. And Longstone says, "I think there is a taxonomy of guilt and shame that Vervaeke digs into." Oh, really? Well, Vervaeke,
Cool.
I actually started listening to Vervaeke again the other day. Really enjoy his stuff. Really good. Benjel says, "Sorry, I just got here. I didn't hear you say that." Oh, don't be sorry. Even if I did say it, there's no harm in saying it in your own words. So we just appreciate you're here and share whatever you feel like sharing. Don't have to apologize.
I'll be right back. You run this alone for a minute. I just got to go rock a piss.
All right. See if you can run it. Let's see if we can find that video by Vervaeke, Longstone. Shame versus guilt. Boom. Gloff, are you still here? Are you working right now? Are you listening to us while you're working? How many of you are listening at work or at school? How many of you are multitasking versus how many of you are just doing this? I'd like to know, just for my own, just gathering. I'm just gathering information here. I'd like to know how you're all mapping us out on your lives. I'm gonna look for this Vervaeke video. Oh, and I also want to update this thumbnail at some point. I forgot about that. We're gonna try to find this Vervaeke video that Longstone talks about. Do you know what it's called, Longstone? Taxonomy. And maybe it's in a long video, so it might be hard to find. Taxonomy of guilt. Vervaeke.
All right, I'll fill the silence for a minute then while you're working on that.
It's not coming up, but yeah, go for it.
So one thing, you know how you were saying that at one point you could look at good and evil as the left and right hand of God. And then at one point we separated out evil as something separate from God.
Yeah.
there was also the idea of God where the left and right hand are mercy and justice.
That's right.
Neither being good or evil. But you can take either of those, isolate them from the rest of God. So take just the polarity of pure justice, isolate it from the rest of the God, from the wisdom and the interconnectedness, and it can become evil. And within ourselves, certain forces like the desire to shame others or certain subpersonalities, that if those take you over on their own, like each subpersonality is in a lot of ways like the lowercase g gods, or like these Luciferian archetypes where isolated on their own, they want to believe that their vision of reality is the total vision of reality, and then enforce that on other people. And anything isolated, disconnected from everything else, certain it's right, and just looking to enforce that on the world is where evil seems to come from. The same way that you isolate a certain part of God, and a powerful ability isolated from all others becomes evil. It's the same thing within ourselves. When the shame itself takes us over and convinces us that its worldview is the reality, that's when we're lost to doing such complete evil.
Keep going with that, man. I'm doing something on the interwebs.
You're lining something up?
I'm lining something up on the interwebs.
And then, yeah, and to go back to that, I'd like to hear more at some point from you on what you think about that idea of, like, who's really to blame for, in any of these stories, that first villain that turns on the creator. That if Lucifer or, what was the name in the book you're using?
His original name was Melkor, but then he's now known as Morgoth. Actually, well, later known as Morgoth because of his evil, he no longer deserved to be called what he was originally called.
Okay, but so is that Morgoth's fault, or is it the creator's fault?
Well, that was the question, right? Because the creator essentially created Melkor, and Melkor, as he was originally created, had the impulse to do this, just like Eve had the impulse to eat the apple, just like Adam was convinced to eat the apple. So who's really to blame, or is there really a blame to be placed in this circumstance where it just is as it is? And then Jung had similar ideas. For example, he had this big vision when he was a kid of a big turd dropping itself on top of the church. And he was just a kid, and it bothered him for days. Why did this gigantic turd get dropped on the church, and why would I think such a thing? What could be possibly wrong with me that I would think such a thing? And then he eventually came to the conclusion that God makes me think this. God makes me see this turd falling on the church. Therefore, God is, in a sense, pooping on the church. And, he had all this symbolic, he had a symbolic interpretation of what that meant. But fundamentally, the idea that some impulses are just what they are, and they're actually not as personal as we like to make them seem, but then we take on the burden of shame or guilt or whatever it would be for having the impulse in the first place. But was it really ever our choice?
And yet we're told, or at least me growing up, we're told God's all good and God's all knowing.
Right.
God created Lucifer, so which is it? Was he an idiot, or did he mean for that to happen? Because if I make a robot and it goes around killing people, either I fucked up or I built the robot to go around killing people.
Right, and that's why Jung thought that God was both terrible and lovely, but truly terrible. He really thought God was terrible.
Yeah, so either that was an accident, that God tried to create all St. Michaels and one of them turned, or right from the beginning when God was creating angels, the idea was that half, or is it half or is it only a third, whatever, that a certain amount would turn corrupt. And so people like to define it like evil against God in a certain way, but either God fucked up or God put that all there. However, I find, and I don't even know if I could articulate this well at the moment, but I find that when I think deeply enough on it, that it could be that God intentionally created evil because evil and suffering are what creates the good. And that in the end, the sum totality of this is good.
Yeah.
That it all is aiming towards redemption. And in fact, me and Grizz were talking about this last night. Like in that, when Peterson talks about that when consciousness comes in, when Eve took the bite, like to know good and evil, that suffering came as a necessary consequence of that. That it seems that coming along with higher consciousness seems to come this suffering and pain. But it seems to me that it's not even like that's the cost of it, but that suffering is the tool which creates higher consciousness. Because if I think about it, if consciousness is created in Eden and there is no danger, there is no pain, and every experience is some form of bliss, why would you develop your consciousness whatsoever? We would all just be walking around drooling and laughing, and like, if everything was edible and nothing was a danger, why would we think deeply about anything? When I look back on my own life, it's the worst pain and suffering that pushes me to think more deeply, that expands my consciousness. And the same way that under the right circumstances, like with the proper foundation underneath a plant, the intense sunlight, like the result of that fire is that the plant develops and grows and becomes something greater. And it seems to me that suffering itself, assuming you have the right foundation, like the right support and everything else to go along with it, that it's just like our bodies. The way to make your body stronger and better is to suffer, is to exercise, to push it the right amount with the proper nutrition. And I think it's possible that just you cannot create higher consciousness, this deeper experience that you can learn to achieve, that you just cannot create that knowledge of good and evil, that suffering's the actual tool that creates it.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Hegelian dialectic where you have the synthesis, and I've talked about this before, and antithesis, you have synthesis, you have antithesis, thesis,
antithesis.
And then synthesis.
Yeah.
Where Satan would be the antithesis, Christ would be the thesis, as one example, and then the synthesis would be, whatever comes out of the man that is able to reconcile those two facets of existence or something of that nature. So there's all sorts of examples of how we need these polar opposites, these tensions, in order to grow. And through the tension, we are forced to make these leaps of consciousness. And Piaget, in his cognitive learning model, called them, what did he call them? Like these cognitive, some sort of, I'm not getting the words right. It's like a cognitive leap of transformation, and where you're at maximum energization and maximum disequilibrium, and then that's where the transformation happens, where you're either going to transform or you're going to explode at that point. Like the only options for your being is to become something totally different because of the tension, or to actually cease to exist, or to go through some major regression or something of that kind. So it does make sense to me what you're saying, that we need the tension in order to grow, in order to change, in order for there to be some diversity in our existence. We need to have pieces of existence that we can define ourselves against and push back against us as we push back against them, to see where our limits are, where our boundaries are, and to feel what it's like to be, essentially. And through that, I think through that basic fundamental fact of existence, we have no other choice but to understand that there are parts of being that are intolerable. And through wrestling with those parts of being that are intolerable, we either have to transform or otherwise regress or cease to exist in some way.
Yeah, and that reminds me of like, you know, the way Peterson says about like the people who are very against the patriarchy, or, you know, sort of Western society. He likes to point out that, like, yes, there are all these real problems with hierarchy and whatnot. Yes, it dispossesses people. Yes, there's suffering caused by this system, but you also have to be grateful for everything this system's giving you. Like, he's really encouraging us to see the balance, both the problems with it and how it serves us as well. But then I found, and I didn't get through the whole thing, something came up, and I watched half of his talk with Steven Pinker. Weird, we're coming back to Pinker.
Yeah, I watched that, yeah.
And so remember when they talked about entropy?
Yeah.
Like, all suffering comes from entropy, and it's like they were really demonizing entropy, I found there. But you can do the same thing that Peterson says to do for, you know, hierarchy with entropy itself. Like, even they made the statement, all suffering is the result, all human suffering is the result of entropy. But Peterson also will say, and life is suffering. Then you could say, and I think this is true, and you could therefore say all human life comes from entropy. So perhaps we could be grateful that we're fucking here at all, because this wouldn't work without entropy. We need things to break down. We needed star systems to explode to create the atoms we're made of. We need the old shit to break down, and death and life, or even they went on to describe like how all these pathogens that are constantly attacking us. Or Peterson likes to go on about how nature's constantly trying to kill you. Well, you've made this defining line between yourself and nature, where, what, you want every microbe taken out of your body? No, you want all the beneficial bacteria and gut microbes. And Pinkerton will even frame it like nature is attacking you. The pathogen is attacking you. But what's defending you? That's nature as well. Your immune system is nature. And we would not be here without life and death. We need things to break down.
Well, I think a fair criticism of Peterson and Pinker would be that they tend to potentially over-defend Western civilization as such, as a reaction to postmodern ideology, which really is about social deconstructionism and so forth, which does break things down. And that's an interesting idea, because that could essentially lead to the potential of an interesting transformation as the result of that breakdown. But I've often thought that Peterson's more traditional than might be best suited for my soul. Also, I've often thought I deeply and desperately needed that traditionalism to find an identity that works for me in the world that I'm in. Because we do, after all, find ourselves in a society that functions the way it does, and that we ought to make the best of it, because this is what other choices do we have, and what better options do we have other than to go become hermits or to go into absolute rebellion or these other things. But Peterson really helped me reconcile the fact that this is the society I'm in, and there's some shitty things about it, but it's like, how can I make my life work in this situation? Because there's also a lot of great things about it, like the fact that I have running water and the lights are on and all those things that he talks about. And yeah, Peterson is, but I will say that for me, who's a big guy about going into the wilderness and doing vision quests and meditations and, you know, shamanic things that's really involved in leaving society and going and being with nature, I have sometimes felt that Peterson is a tad more societal than I'll ever be.
Yeah, and like I'm the same way. But I found even before encountering Peterson, going off and being the hermit, like you said, and going into the mystical shit, I think I came like to myself to the conclusion that while I totally like I fucking love the V for Vendetta archetype. Obviously, I was very leftist, very anti-society. I came in my own to an understanding that I was being that as much as all of that is valid, everything Peterson says in defense of Western civilization is valid too. And I think he makes a great point that while being aware of what's wrong with the society, we should remain grateful for the good things it does, even though it does some bad. And I think you can also turn that and apply it to more metaphysical things, like the nature of the universe, that it's easy to complain about the evil. It's easy to complain about the suffering. It's easy to complain about entropy. But those also are serving us in a shitload of ways that if we lost those, I think we would lose the whole universe. And that's just it. Like Peterson wants to point out, don't just fantasize about destroying the government. You have no idea what horror would arise. You know, you can't just wipe it out. But the same thing with suffering and evil and all of that, we like to fantasize that that's somehow unjust and that somehow the world's existence is worse because of it. But I think it might be a fundamental requirement to create the overall experience, and that the good out, like that in the final analysis, it's all good. And when you try to be grateful for things and to see how they serve you, it's amazing how differently you can experience things. It's like applied to my own life. I am now grateful for the difficulties I've had, as opposed to railing against them. And I see how it served me in the long run.
That's beautiful.
Same thing, Peterson could probably spend some time contemplating what good the social justice warriors are doing. Like, and I'm not going to disagree with him about any of the things they're doing that they shouldn't be blasting air horns in his ears, or like, yes, they may be fucking a bunch of shit up, but also how are they serving us? They're performing some function for society overall that's a result of current circumstances. What are they expressing? How can we alchemically?
And I know Dan is here, username Danny Rumico, and he used to work closely as assistant for Ken Wilber. And Wilber's model actually makes his integral theory actually makes room for postmodernism as a phase. Yeah. It's a stage of development that needs to be left behind, but is essential in, making the soil prepared for that next step, which would be, I think it's like postmodernism or something silly like that, some silly name like that. But essentially what you're saying, it's that through this phase of social deconstruction and criticism of everything, there's a way in which that might prepare the soil for something new. However, there are those of us who don't find it necessary to indulge in that deconstructionism in order to evolve further. Like you, for example, or me, or other, I would argue a lot of people, we see the folly of the postmodern thinking, in which it eventually just leads to nihilism and just there is no meaning in anything, right? That everything's relative. So we see that, and we see that there's a victim culture that's behind that, and that none of it is really going to go anywhere ultimately. And so because of that ability to see that, we're able to skip right past that phase, essentially.
No, I don't skip past it. I use it. If you can understand that postmodern road to nihilism, that is a skill that when put together with other ones, it's like the solvay of the solvaying coagulant. To build something long-term, you need both a dissolvent and a glue. So when you're trapped in a bad way of thinking, when you've allowed something to become too important and you realize it's warped everything, like when you put too much pressure on yourself with the channel, you needed to dissolve that pressure and put together a new plan. I've got to dissolve the mindset that said I have to do this
But
3 days a week.
That's different than postmodernism as such.
Well,
That's
no,
a different.
I find that postmodernism, like that way of thinking, is useful. When you realize you've hit a wall, you need to go back and be able to, in a postmodern way, take apart each of your assumptions and go, you know what, that doesn't matter. I projected the meaning on that. And if I projected the meaning on that, I can undo this. I can remove it to a nihilistic, it doesn't matter what I do.
I don't think that's postmodern.
Up from it within myself.
I think you're abstracting wisdom out of a process, but that in of itself, to me, wouldn't qualify as postmodern thinking. That would qualify as a certain type of wisdom that's generalized and abstracted and seen within a pattern of thinking in postmodernism. But I don't view that as an actual postmodern lens personally, and I could be totally wrong and uneducated about that, but that's not my understanding of actual the actual thinking that goes into the pathological side of it.
Yeah, but it's that what you're talking about is just postmodernism as a complete ideology. Yeah. I'm talking about when you take that and make it one of 10 tools.
You're going meta.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I got that. I just wanted to make the distinction that I don't, in of itself, I don't think that postmodernism is doing what you're doing with those ideas.
Yeah, no, because it's not using any of the other things together. But within myself, it's useful to have a sub-personality.
Absolutely. Well, that's working within a larger that's a larger context, right?
Yes.
Whereas to a complete postmodernism would try to shove everything into that one personality. You're looking at it as the one of many personalities, one of many polytheistic gods that need to be paid tribute to. So I'm on board with that. I just couldn't say that in of itself was anyways, you get my point. Let's read these comments. Gabor Eric is here. To take a trip to an African country like Somalia or DRC Congo to live anarchy folded out. That's a good point there. Nolan says deconstruction is a chance for reconstruction. I'm not sure if I read that, but that's a great comment. Griswold Grimm says, is Osiris phallus arising from chaos that makes Horus innit? INNIT? I'm not sure. And then we've got Ash B. Hi, gents. Hope you're well. You've both mentioned being introverts. Have you got any tips about practicing your tolerance for being around other people and not getting burned out from them? Should I read the rest of the comments or should we stop there?
Whatever the fuck you want to do.
Let me read all the comments and then we'll start with Ashby's question first.
Sure.
Andrew Jokum says, Gabor Eric, as a white male, you have no right to speak about African countries like that. That's extremely racist. And then you explain that you're being sarcastic, which I get. Dan says, in reality, it's not about East or West. When they mention West, they're trying to refer to modernity. Well, yeah, that's right. It's not truly about Eastern versus Western philosophy anymore, is it? Okay, so Ash's question. You want to take that first?
Sure. So what was it? Like Ash is an introvert and is wanting to work on being able to be around people more?
Tolerate other people without getting burned out. And I hope you're still here, Ash, to hear this.
So I'd say, first of all, don't be feeling guilt about the fact you're an introvert. Don't add a layer of guilt or shame about it. Be okay with the fact that you're an introvert wanting to work on it. I'd say next thing, don't push yourself too hard. Like if you force yourself into way more social interaction than you can handle, just like with anything, if you force yourself too quickly into way too much exercise, you're just going to be damaging your body. And to practice mindfulness when you're with people. So try to be mindful of how am I feeling leading up to see this person. Observe the behavior and see what you can do to relax yourself leading up to it. Then when you're with the person, try to be mindful of the sensations that are difficult. Observe it without judging it as right or wrong. This is just the way you react to being around people, and try to gradually increase, like at a pace that you're comfortable with, so that you set your own pace with it. And then perhaps also be careful who you spend time with. Like Peterson, I think his next book's going to have a rule like be careful who you share good news with, and be careful who you share bad news with. You want someone who can actually accept your good news, that doesn't try to break it down or doesn't try to one-up you. And with bad news, you want someone, same thing, that's going to be present with your news and not try to one-up you by telling you how much harder their life is and how you shouldn't be upset. Pick friends who want the best for you. If you're spending your social interaction with people that you can't be authentic around, that it's going to be more difficult. If you can find people who genuinely care about you and will be happy for you when something goes well, regardless of what's going on in their life, will be sympathetic towards you when something goes wrong, even if they have their own difficulties, and somebody who just wants the authentic you, isn't, people can fall into cliques or tribes and they want to be surrounded by a certain type of person. So they want you to be this certain type, this certain thing, as opposed to yourself. If you can find people that you can be honest and authentic around, it will be easier. If you feel like you can't be yourself around the people you're spending time with, then maybe the problem isn't just that you're an introvert. Maybe you're also spending time around the wrong people. Oh, those are my first thoughts on that. What do you have to add to it?
I would say get a sense of your natural rhythm. And I like to think of it as an analogy of tide in, tide out. When is the tide in? Which, if you imagine the tide's coming in, it's withdrawing, and it just feels natural for it to be that way. And then when the tide's going out, it's expanding. It wants to reach out and connect and interact in some way. So I would say try to catch your rhythm when you go out. Try to do it at a time when it's natural for you to be interacting, and then just be aware of when you feel like you're naturally more reserved and within yourself, and allow that to be there. And then there'll be times where you have to interact even when you don't feel like it. And then I think that's a matter of, like you said in your question, practicing patience and being able to take that sense of shelter with you everywhere you go. One of the signs of the astrological signs, the Gemini, for example, the crab, or Cancer, the crab, has that ability to be sheltered everywhere it goes. So if you find yourself in a position where you feel like you're too exposed, you might ask yourself, how can I find shelter within this particular situation? How could I feel like I'm enclosed in a space that I can interact within a domain that I have some sort of control over, so I'm not just, cast out to chaos, which is kind of what it feels like, I think, for an introvert to be overly exposed socially. So I would say figuring out how to set up a circumstance where you still have that feeling of shelter, whether it's externally or within yourself. You have some sort of mantra or some sort of practice that you're doing that's generating a sense of, I have control over my experience. I am in command of what's happening for me. I'm able to be in flow with this other person. And I'm also very much not losing myself in that dynamic. I think a lot of time for introverts is that we find ourselves through being alone, through separating. Extroverts find themselves through contact with other people. So they find out who they are by pushing up against someone else, and that lets them know that they're real and that they exist. And I'm generalizing, obviously, these aren't universals, but in a sense, you can generalize like this. Whereas introverts need the space and the solitude to find themselves, to know that they exist, to have an existential sense of peace and clarity. And when I'm overly exposed socially, I start losing that. I start losing that sense of personal identity, and I get swept up in that force of other people's ideas and agendas. And I need to withdraw to solidify my own process. So I would say just notice that when you start losing, if you're someone who experiences the sense of I'm losing myself, I'm losing my sense of connection and identity, then that's a good sign. How can I create a shelter, or how can I withdraw in a way that would allow me to reestablish a sense of identity for myself, and then go back out and experiment with, can you actually hold that sense of self and clarity while you're exposed? Practice that and notice when you lose it. Just be aware, just like meditating. Just be aware of when you start losing yourself and you get swept up in that dynamic. Like, for example, sometimes I really enjoy going to a concert or a comedy show or something like that. And other times it's super just against who I am at that moment. And I actually get depressed in a room full of crowded people. Whereas if I could just be alone, then I would find myself feeling at peace. And so I noticed one of the reasons for that is because I lose myself in the intensity of that group experience, and it just doesn't feel in harmony with me for whatever reason. So that's not a good time for me to be out. Where there's other times where I have the energy and it's like, I can do this. I could be out all day. I could go do this for the whole weekend, and I feel strong enough at this moment to keep that sense of connection. So that's my long-winded attempt at answering that question for how it applies to me. I don't know how it applies for you, but that's how I think of it.
And one thing that made me think of, like, a tool I use to sort of shield myself and give me that sense of self if I'm having somebody over, is I use music. Music for me, if I put on music I like, it generates that atmosphere of that energy around myself and that protection that enables it more. And also, music is a powerful magic that it's only recent times that we listen to music alone. Music used to be a group activity, and I forget who, but some Greek or someone, but just the idea, like, to some people, the idea of listening to music alone would have been strange, because music was to create a group atmosphere and to get people in vibration with each other. So if you can incorporate music into your social interaction, either if you're spending time with a small group or one-on-one with somebody, rather than just talking to them like in silence, have good music, ideally that you have something everyone likes, but definitely something that you like, music playing. But also, if you want to get more outgoing, it's easier at a concert, or even at a point where I had a fair amount of social anxiety, I was playing with a band for a while. And there's something about social gatherings around music that I find easier than other types of social interactions. So music can be used in a lot of ways to help introverts connect.
Beautiful. Adela says, how do I live in the present moment if it's unbearable? You want to go first? You want me to take a stab at it?
for me, step one is that it's okay to not be okay. That you just deal with the unbearable present and not also that idea that it shouldn't be that way, is my first thought. How about you?
Yeah, well, I would say one of the primary things is notice that it's unbearable either way. You know, for being in avoidance and hiding away and constantly creating walls against your own present moment experience, it leads to the same amount of, I would argue, it leads to the same amount of suffering as the suffering you're going to experience in the present moment. So the question isn't, are you going to suffer? The question is, are you going to suffer voluntarily? Or are you going to suffer while trying to avoid suffering, which takes more
Mm-hmm.
energy and might even be harder on you in the long run? Um, that being said, it depends on what you mean being in the present moment, right? What does it mean to be in the present moment? Are you setting the bar so high for yourself that you're putting yourself into a trauma response? A lot of people who have PTSD or any sort of trauma, just to ask them to feel their fingers is a traumatic experience because it's not fundamentally safe to be in a body. So they disassociate and they create an experience that's not so tethered to the experience of being in a body. And that's what feels safe. But the sacrifice they're making is that ultimately they're not embodied, which isn't a happy place to live in the long run. It's not the best place to live. So when they try to come back into the moment, which is to be in an experience of being a human, there is a sense of overwhelm, and perhaps if you throw too much at yourself at once, too high of an expectation, then you risk re-traumatizing yourself essentially. So there's this one method called titration that is proven to be pretty successful in trauma work, and I'm using trauma as a primary example because that's what your question is bringing up for me. Is the and I'm not saying you have trauma. I can't qualify that for you over this medium, but the idea is that you experience the discomfort. So let's say you experience what it's like to feel this part of your body for a couple seconds. You breathe into that, you own that experience, and then you titrate, meaning you move to an experience that actually feels safe and comfortable. So whether that's in some practices they'll say pick a part of your body that does feel safe or that feels neutral, that doesn't feel anything, like one of your toes or a little really small part of your leg, like something that's almost so neutral and doesn't bring up a supercharge that when you go to that place, it creates a sense of indifference or safety. So then you go to that for a little bit and you breathe into that. Then you switch back to the discomfort. You basically do this process of titration until the switching back and forth, it does something in your brain that creates a sense of safety. It almost, if you imagine it like some sort of neurological cross wiring that starts to happen to integrate you through that switching process. So that's one way of doing it, is to start using the body as a mechanism by which you can explore the present moment, because our bodies are always with us, right? And our bodies are actually, in the end, they're more grounding than our thoughts. Our thoughts are like clouds or wind, that they're so fleeting. They're not, thinking isn't necessarily a grounding presence, but if you can feel your feet on the ground, or you can feel what it's like to breathe, or you can feel your pulse. Any of these things, these are grounding exercises. These will bring you a sense of weight. It's heavy, So that's my suggestion, is find your way into your body in a way that's manageable and safe, and incrementally, small steps. Look up people like, who's the guy that wrote, he's like an expert in trauma. something trauma expert. He wrote a book about a tiger. Something trauma. I get it here. Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma. And again, if this doesn't apply to you, then just ignore it. But for some reason, trauma is coming through in my mind. Peter Levine. He's fantastic. Look him up on YouTube or order one of his books. And that can really help getting back into the present moment. Yeah.
Another thing, when we're suffering, we can have a tendency to feel like that's pathetic. We can be ashamed of our suffering or feel guilt for it. Whereas, like with everything we talked about earlier, about the way shame and difficulty and suffering can corrupt us. For many of us, especially if it's, I'm suffering, that's pathetic, and it shouldn't be this way, we start looking to blame other people, or we start becoming resentful, or there's so many paths to hell that branch off from suffering if you can't accept the suffering. So to me, I honestly find it heroic when somebody can suffer nobly. If you can suffer without being corrupted, if you can suffer and notice all the impulses that we have when we're suffering that are wrong, to make someone else suffer so we feel better, to blame other people unreasonably, to expect and demand help of others to fix our problems.
Yeah.
Suffering, just taking it on, enduring the present moment while committed to not making things worse for anyone else, and just to endure it nobly, to me is very, very, very fucking heroic. And if you can learn to see it that way, it makes it easier to get through it. Like, okay, I'm suffering, but like with the importance that you would put in a fictional story of the hero enduring the suffering, but I'm not going to let this corrupt me.
Yep. Actually, do you mind if I show a clip that we can react to together?
Yeah, sure.
It relates to the topic of trauma. This is a Peter Levine video, and he's working with somebody who has severe PTSD, and I think it's an interesting clip, so let's check it out. Okay.
And what kinds of symptoms are you having?
Well, in the beginning, this happened on June 18th.
So this guy essentially got blown up by what is it called? Like with the bombs, the explosives at war, an IED. And I think he lost a few of his friends in that explosion. But anyways, this is fascinating. I'm gonna have to pause it every so often to give responses so we don't get a copyright tag. But yeah, let's roll it.
Of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I had to kind of teach myself how to walk, talk, and think again. And I guess every day it's been getting a little better, kind of. Now mostly I'm dealing with sensitivity to bright lights.
Yes.
Lack of concentration.
Mm-hmm.
Headaches.
Yeah. You just said.
See that twitch right there? He does that twitch all the time. And the result of this work is actually that stopped completely. Levine's kind of a wizard when it comes to working with people in this regard.
That you learn to walk, talk, and think again.
Uh,
How did you do that?
I just fought for a lot of things.
I fought for a lot of things.
Everybody told me I would push things too much, but I just fought for everything that I wanted because I wanted to be able to. I don't like it when people take care of me. I can't stand it.
Mm.
So I mean, hey,
Yeah. You want your independence.
exactly. I wanted my independence back, and I didn't. I don't like the idea of being a burden to somebody.
Mm.
Just kind of looking at the fireplace. It makes me a little warmer.
And
I
okay.
think warmth when I look at that.
Yes.
So now what he's doing, and this is the part of a series of way longer videos, he's doing something that I know is resourcing. So he's directing his attention to things in the room, and he's having him describe them, and it's a way of getting past the traumatic experience in the nervous system and creating a sense of safety and groundedness and calming.
For sure. And feeling the warmth. And just noticing how where your eyes want to go, and how they want and draw in the different
I just
colors.
keep on going to that picture right there.
Which one?
On the bookshelf
Aha.
with those, it looks like two kids. I don't know.
Oh, yes.
The feeling that I get out of it is I get out of teamwork and kind of love as a brother and sister at the same time.
Wow. Beautiful image.
This is helping him transition from preparing for war, being in war, and then returning home for the familial intimacy. And so many soldiers bring the war back with them. If they don't...
Comments real quick, Merc, before I keep going?
No, I don't have any comments yet.
Yeah, I have to keep on commenting just as a routine for copyright. But basically, I love what he's saying about they brought the war back with them, and now it's about realizing where they actually are. Because in their brains, in their nervous system, the imprint, the memory is so strong that they're actually not here. And you see that a lot with trauma. I've experienced and worked with people who have trauma, and often what you'll see is, although the walls around you are safe and the people around you are safe and the environment for all intents and purposes is safe, what they're seeing within them is a totally different world that's not safe at all. And so part of the work that I'm pointing out that he's doing here is by bringing them back to where they are, right? There was a time where they weren't safe, and that time was truly not safe. So they had to escape, they had to disassociate, they had to do all these things to manage that experience. And those were all tools that they used to get themselves through it. And then those tools, like we were talking about earlier, instincts that outserve their purpose, those tools overstayed their welcome, and they stayed disassociated, and they didn't reintegrate back into the world that is safe that they're back into at that point. So now we can keep rolling.
Okay. And actually, wait, yeah, I thought of something else now while you're saying that. So the way he was having him focus like on things around him to bring him into the present moment.
Yep.
Just what occurs to me is that you can, if you combine that with Peterson's rule about cleaning your room and that degree to which the difference between us and our home isn't so clear. And so if you're having trouble being in the present moment, whether it's past trauma or whatever, can you clean up your environment? Can you beautify it? And can you find anything that makes it easier for you to focus on it? So for instance, with me, collecting vintage toys, I find times when I'm really having a hard time getting a toy that appeals to my inner child, putting it in front of me, it's easier for me to focus on that and focus on just anything in particular. You know, it might be harder to just, or if you really love trees, or if you really love cats, like have a cat that your present moment can be paying attention to the cat, because it's an easy thing to pay attention to. Or can you find some great work of art that's easy to pay attention to? And can you hang it on your wall right in front of where you sit all the time? So when you notice you're struggling with the present moment, you can try to have a present moment with that one thing that you've specifically placed in your environment for the sake of allowing you to be present with it.
That's beautiful. That's really great conceptual mixing there, Rick. Thanks for sharing that.
Which reminds me, we never got back to Justice Curry. We should do that talk with him sometime in the next month or two at the latest.
Yeah,
But
that's good. I mean, I basically I'm unavailable till mid to late September, so we'll have to do it then.
yeah, let's try to fit it in then.
Okay.
Don't resolve the war experiences, then they bring that kind of violence back into the home. And it makes relating to their spouse and their children almost impossible. And so this is a really important part into helping them make that transition from the kill or be killed to love and be loved.
So, anyways, I would highly recommend watching this full video. You can see it at www.psychotherapy.net. I've watched the full process of that guy going from having this tick that he kept doing like this to just totally in control of his body. Beautiful, therapeutic, healing experience. I think Peter Levine is the leading expert in trauma-based psychotherapy. So he's a good resource. And notice there too, the presence that he had in the counseling room was very calming. So that's another thing, that if you know somebody in your life that's dealing with intense traumatic disruptions, who have issues with regulating their own nervous system, if you're someone who's able to be a regulated nervous system, there's this process of what's it called? It's not attunement. There's a different word. It's where the nervous systems actually start to come to a level of synchronization. I forget the exact word for it, but essentially, if you're a calming force in the room, the likelihood that they're going to come down to your level of groundedness is higher. Whereas if you get swept up in someone else's panic, that's just going to make it worse. So it's very good to practice being calm, being in the eye of the storm, being able to be in a situation where someone's having a panic attack or someone's extremely angry, and you're checking your pulse, you're able to stay calm. That takes a lot of practice with being in situations like that. When I witnessed my first secondhand panic attacks, where I was watching people, anything from banging their heads against the wall to pulling their hair out to all these hurting themselves, my heart rate would go fucking, it would just shoot up. And now I'm to the point where I'm like, just steady, because you expose yourself to it and you practice, and it's really important you practice not losing yourself in the other person's experience. They're not okay, I'm okay, right? It's easy to get into, they're not okay, so I'm not okay. They're not okay, so I'm not okay. You want to get to, okay, they're not okay, I'm here, this is me, I'm a force of calm in this room. And then you go from there, and that's actually, it's a tremendous, even if you're not going to work with people in this way, it's a tremendous asset to have in your toolbox to be able to stay calm when other people are extremely activated.
And I think, like everything you just said, to build on that, even the way I often say that, like when you're dealing with a really fucked up state, like being suicidal, you've got to be okay with being suicidal. If you also put the pressure that's not right on yourself, it makes it harder. Or when you're having a panic attack, you're also saying to yourself, it's not okay to have panic attacks. It makes it worse. But you can also see that with outside people. And sometimes it can be hard with someone we're close to. But if someone has a panic attack and their entire peer group or their parents take them aside and tell them how not okay that is, or if someone's suicidal and you give them a big lecture that it's wrong to be suicidal, and you tell them they can't be like this anymore, they've got to make a fucking change now, you're declaring it's not okay for you to not be okay. On the other hand, if you're dealing with someone really fucked up, if you can go into that with, okay, it's okay that they're really fucked up. And for me, all that metaphysical backing has a profound effect, because I do believe it is okay for people to suffer that much. In the long run, it is for their own good. It allows me to be present with someone suicidal. where I'm in no way telling them there's any problem with being suicidal beyond that it's difficult for them. And like, I have the sympathy that, hey, this is difficult, but it's okay. And once you calm down and can be present with it, we can also do what we can do from here forward to improve it. But even when we're trying to improve it, it's okay if you have another panic attack. That's fine. You'll get through it. And who gives a fuck if somebody looks down on our group? Because we've got people who have panic attacks in our group. We don't give a fuck what they think anyway. They're not wise or interconnected. It's okay to be fucked up, especially if you're fucked up and working towards the good. Not only is that okay, that's heroic. If you've got a really difficult life and you experience on a regular basis extreme states and you're enduring it nobly, like, that's fantastic. You're now an admirable person if you're doing the best you can. And so just to allow people to have the trauma they have, and that's okay. And all right, so you're twitching or whatever, that's okay. I'll just be present with you.
Yep, that's right. That's right. That's great, Mark. Well, I've got to wrap up. Any last minute comments? Thank you for sticking with us for a couple hours and for letting us go on that tangent there for the last 20 minutes or so. And we hope that we addressed the questions, especially the ones that you had, Ash and Adela. And let us know if there's follow-up questions or if we missed the mark or if you need something else for next time. Yeah, anything else from anybody?
I would finish on, well, I don't know if you're clear enough on your idea for your paper, but if you wanted to throw out any of the things that you need to research, maybe some of the people watching will have suggestions for what you might want to look into for research on your paper. So do you have any topics that you wanted any feedback on for that?
Yeah, well, if anybody has general information on the hostile brother archetypes, so the Cain and Abel, Loki and Thor, Christ and Satan, all, on and on and on. There's tons of examples. What is the Egyptian one is Osiris and Set, I think it's Osiris and Set. So all of those, if you have information, you can send that to us on Discord or sortingmyselfout0@gmail if you want, as well as any general information about Tolkien's analysis of Tolkien's Silmarillion. So yeah, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It doesn't look like anybody has any last minute comments. So
all right, well, good hanging out with you on air.
Yeah, you too, Merc. It was great to catch up.
And yeah, I know you'll be busy for the next while, but once your schedule clears up a little bit in the future, I'm looking forward to doing more of this with you.
Yeah, and if you're feeling up for it, maybe you can take next Monday, because I have one of my family members is going to be in surgery, and I'm going to have to be in the waiting room while they're in surgery. So I won't be able to stream. Only if you feel like it. Otherwise, we won't. If you're up for it, otherwise there won't be a stream next Monday, and we'll pick it up the following week.
I think the odds are good I could fill in for you next Monday.
Yeah.
Sure yet? So
We'll keep it tentative. I just wanted everyone to have something to think about if there was a chance you could do it. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you, Mark.
Bye.